Thanks so much for joining me. I'm with Mariah Blake, an investigative journalist and author of this amazing book that I'm so excited to read. I'm hoping that you could start by telling us your journey to this book and why it's so important for people to know about these chemicals that you cover.
So in many ways, it was a very personal journey. My interest in toxic chemicals dates back to 2010. At the time, I was pregnant with my son, and I was aware that certain chemicals could be extremely harmful to developing fetuses and young children. And so I began researching them as a way to protect my own family. And what I discovered really shocked me, just in terms of the number of chemicals that are in circulation that are toxic and that are known to be toxic, and how little regulation there is. So that was sort of the starting point of my journey. So I'm an investigative journalist, and eventually I started writing articles about the plastics industry and how it deploys big tobacco style tactics to downplay the health effects of its products. And in the process of reporting one of those stories, I stumbled upon a complaint that a family of West Virginia farmers had filed against DuPont. And that was really the starting point of this book. So this book is about forever chemicals, or PFAS. And at the time, almost no one had heard of this class of chemicals, but this family of farmers, their cattle were dying off because of runoff from a DuPont landfill. So DuPont operated a local factory that used PFAS in production. And they had filed this lawsuit that exposed this breathtaking cover-up involving a certain forever chemical that's used in Teflon. And it was clear from the documents that had been released in their case that this chemical was in the blood of virtually every person on the planet, that it was highly toxic, that it persisted in the environment for hundreds or thousands of years. And yet the public and regulators hadn't even really known it existed until the farmers brought their case.
Wow.
So that's a long answer to your question, but I wrote a story about the farmers and their legal battle against DuPont, which is really the thing that put this entire class of chemicals, which are now the subject of, major media scrutiny and regulatory efforts all over the world. But it was this farmers' case that put it on the radar.
Can you clarify also just DuPont, what they create, what they manufacture?
So DuPont is a chemical behemoth. They manufacture a variety of chemicals, but they also manufacture Teflon, and Teflon, which is used on pots and pans to make them nonstick, but it's also found in cosmetics. It's used on various furniture and on clothing, so it's found in all kinds of everyday products. It is a type of forever chemical, or PFAS, and it's made with certain forever chemicals that are highly toxic.
And can you just clarify as well? I know the rhetoric around forever chemicals and PFAS and that it's bad for you, but if you could just drill down a bit on why they're bad for our health and what they do to us, what the effects are.
Well, they have a number of effects. So they're associated with a variety of diseases. So everything from kidney cancer and thyroid disease to obesity, diabetes, certain autoimmune conditions, life-threatening pregnancy complications, and the mechanisms are varied, but they have these effects in some cases at very, very low levels of exposure. So the levels of exposure that every American has in their blood.
Wow. Are there any stories that you came across in your reporting that really made you pause and think this is a really big story that people need to know about and to try to limit their exposure to these forever chemicals?
Well, I think from the very beginning, when I stumbled upon these documents, and at the time, as I say, nobody had even heard of this class of chemicals, but it was clear to me that these chemicals were in drinking water all around the world, that these chemicals were in blood all around the world, that they were in ecosystems all around the world. And I think the research has only borne that out. So I think the clearest example of just how ubiquitous they are in the environment comes from a 2022 study of rainwater around the world. This group of prominent European scientists looked at the levels of just the two best known and best studied PFAS in rain all around the world. And they found everywhere in the world, including remote regions like the Tibetan Plateau, the levels were high enough to endanger human health and the environment.
Wow.
So the levels were higher than the EPA's safety standards, even in these very, very remote regions. And the authors concluded, based on this, and these are respected environmental scientists, that the entire world was now outside the safe operating space for humanity, and that governments needed to take steps to turn off the tap on these chemicals immediately. So I think that there are a lot of things that shocked me in the course of my research. There are a lot of things that really drove home just how serious of a problem this is. But I think if I had to boil it down to one discovery that really sort of crystallized the scope of the problem, that would probably be it.
I mean, it sounds like an invisible assault on our bodies all day long from all different kinds of sources.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I would just say that forever chemicals, or PFAS, they're just one of a number of toxic chemicals that we're all exposed to on a daily basis. So I chose to focus my research on this one class of chemicals, but there are similar stories to be told about other types of chemicals that are everywhere, that are in our homes, they're in the products we use on a daily basis.
Has there been any progress in the regulation of these toxins?
Well, it varies by substance and by region. But in the case of forever chemicals, or PFAS, there has been a tremendous amount of progress on the state level. So far, 30 US states have passed nearly 200 laws restricting these chemicals, including class-wide bans on, so bans on the entire class of chemicals in certain consumer goods. In some cases. Now, this is groundbreaking, because that's not how we normally regulate chemicals in this country. Normally, we regulate them one by one. And this trend has only accelerated since Donald Trump took office. So we now have, I believe it's 275 state-level laws in the pipeline.
Okay.
But there are other trends that are emerging at the same time. So you have more than 15,000 lawsuits that have been filed against manufacturers. The EU is weighing a class-wide ban on these chemicals. It would be the most aggressive the most aggressive regulation of any chemical in the bloc's history. So the convergence of these three trends, state-level regulation on the EU level, and this tsunami of litigation, are prompting broad swaths of the economy to voluntarily migrate away from PFAS. So 3M, and this is significant, 3M, which was the largest manufacturer of these chemicals for decades, announced earlier this year that it had gotten out of the business. It is no longer manufacturing them.
Okay.
40 major retail chains with nearly $2 trillion in combined annual sales have committed to reducing or eliminating these chemicals in their packaging and products. And we're talking huge corporations. So McDonald's, Amazon, Home Depot, Taco Bell. So, I think this trend promises to move us towards turning off the tap on these chemicals faster than regulation, because regulation moves slowly and markets move fast. So, yes, there has been remarkable progress, largely as a result of concerned citizens all across this country whose lives have been directly impacted by these chemicals.
I mean, that's good to hear. My one question on that is, if these companies are then producing the same products but with safer substances, or are they creating other substitutes for these chemicals that are also harmful, or are they able to move away from them in a way that is actually healthier for us?
Well, so what exactly the substitute is going to depend on the application. But historically, what has happened with chemicals, when a company comes under pressure to quit using a chemical because of evidence that it's harmful, it simply replaces that chemical with another substance that has a similar structure and similar properties. And oftentimes that chemical ends up being just as harmful. So there's the example of BPA, which was just replaced with BPS. But the way this chemical the way PFAS are being regulated on a state level, and potentially the EU, actually helps disrupt that kind of what they call regrettable substitution, right?
Okay.
When you ban the entire class of chemicals, it's less likely that you just end up replacing one bad chemical with another bad chemical. And I think that is a response to the unique threat posed by PFAS. People realize that you can't address this class of 15,000 chemicals one at a time.
Right.
You would just never get around to addressing all of them. And because they persist in the environment indefinitely, every molecule that's been produced is going to be out there for generations. So you have regulators starting to move towards regulating this particular class of chemicals as a class. But now that that's happening with PFAS, you see the same sort of regulations starting to crop up when it comes to other chemicals. So you have laws on the state level that would ban, say phthalates as a class, or bisphenols, other classes of chemicals that are known to be toxic. And I think this is something that people who promote green chemistry or responsible chemical regulation, this is something they've long promoted, is regulating chemicals as a class rather than one by one. And so this is starting to happen. And that is, I think it really does go a long way towards preventing this situation, this game of whack-a-mole, where you ban one chemical and you end up, it's just replaced with another chemical that is potentially equally harmful.
That's really good to hear, and I'm glad that is happening. It seems like a no-brainer way to regulate these chemicals.
Yes.
My last question to you is, with the inertia of the regulations being passed and the fact that these chemicals are already out there, what do you recommend for people to do now to help protect themselves? I'm sure there's a million things that people can do, but maybe the biggest impact actions.
Yeah, there are a few things that I generally recommend. One is that people filter their drinking water with a system that's certified to remove PFAS. Even if you haven't yet heard that your drinking water has PFAS in it, chances are it does. So, and a simple undersink system is sufficient for most people. For cooking and food storage, I recommend that people use natural materials like stainless steel and glass, and that will protect you from all kinds of toxic chemicals, because there are a lot of toxic chemicals in plastic and other synthetic materials. Another step people can take is avoiding microwave popcorn and limiting fast food consumption, because both microwave popcorn bags and fast food packaging often contain high levels of PFAS. The formulations are changing, but you can't know which brands are and aren't using PFAS in their packaging. I guess one other thing people can do is just avoid materials that are marketed as non-stick, stain-proof, grease-resistant. And actually I have one final recommendation, which is avoid eating locally caught freshwater fish, because studies have found that eating a single portion of locally caught freshwater fish can increase your blood levels as much as drinking heavily polluted water for an entire month. And that is because our waterways are so polluted with these chemicals.
Oh my gosh, because all the marketing these days is you should have fresh caught fish over farmed fish.
Yeah, and I think that's probably still true with seafood. So, but fish that are caught in lakes and rivers tend to have high levels of these chemicals in their body.
Okay. These are all great recommendations. I'm going to be implementing these when I go home.
This is what I do. And this doesn't guarantee you won't be exposed, because they are everywhere. But, I think in my life, I take the steps that I can take to protect my family, and then I just, I try to put it out of my mind.
Thank you so much for the advice.
Yeah, thank you.